Okay, so my project has been for a while now. It's open legislation, and I've probably given this talk too many times to some of the people that are in here, but we've got a lot of new people, so I thought I'd spend at least a little time on what the project was. So it's really an open data project, and by open data we mean open data in government context. So how can you, so it's a project to take data on government activities and make it available to the public. So these open data things, they come in at least two kinds of forms. There's secondary sources, which are places like Open Congress, Open States, GovTrack.us, Fed spending, and what they'll do is they'll take in data sets from primary government sources, or they'll scrape them from their websites, or I know in some instances the government doesn't actually keep track of this stuff. So like the Open States project, some of their information, there's actually an organization paying a guy to run over and tally up the votes because they don't like record them electronically, and then run them back over and put them in the computer so that they can have them. So secondary sources are nice, but and they fill in the gaps where primary sources aren't available, but primary sources are a lot better. And I guess this was sort of my justification for continuing to work here as opposed to on some of the other projects, like in particular Open States is a really great Python-based project to bring all of the legislative information on the state level into one API available to everybody. And I think they've launched with like 5 states so far, and they've got experimental support for another like 16, and they're going from there. But so primary sources are better. Like in data.gov itself isn't exactly primary, but it provides an outlet for the organizations providing the primary data. It's not like it's been scraped or reprocessed or anything by people other than the people in charge of maintaining the information. And then a lot of different states have it, and there's some government sites for it. But sometimes, I would hold anyway, just having the information out there, having it out there in just this really big like SQL file or XML file dump isn't enough. I think that in some cases you really need to build platforms for the information. And so I would say platforms are a different breed of open. You've got data.gov that's just publishing Excel sheets and things like that. But you can do better things to make the information accessible, like include built-in search, permanent URIs, so it's web accessible on a very granular level. Provide standardized feeds to the information, and then from that you can pull out real-time alerts. So very simply, do something with the REST architecture, like what Colin's group, the concert group, had talked about before. And then you can, if you want alerts, you can just put pub/sub, hubbub in front of that and get hooks and stuff. So anyway, so back to open legislation. So open legislation is a tool to browse, search, and share legislative information from the New York Senate. It's not opening my link, or maybe it did. Oh, you're not connected to the internet, or are you? No, you are. Wait, why is this not working? No, there we go. Okay, false alarm. How do I maximize?
Drag it to the top, or click the green thing.
To the top. Okay, so you go like. Okay, cool. So this is open legislation in production, and I'm not going to demo too much, but so like let's say you're a citizen concerned about health, like anything to do with health, then you can. I did spell health wrong. I'm amazed I got a result. Okay. So then you can pull down all these different results. And this is very granular with meetings, actions, transcripts, votes, different bills, and we can filter on bills and other things, and they've got web views like that. But this is sort of open legislation, the web service. And like I said, OpenLegislation is a platform. So there's a whole other end of it where there are APIs where you can get XML and JSON access to every single point of data that is used for the service. In fact, the web application I just showed is built on using the API. So it's kind of weird because we have direct access to the information, but in order to make sure that the API was really robust, we sort of built the application on top of it as like proof of concept. And so it powers a couple different mobile applications and the NewYorkSenate.gov website for legislative information. And so the project's kind of interesting. It's the New York Senate. 2 years ago, the Democrats got majority, I shouldn't say back, they got majority for the first time in like 30 years. And they started a CIO office, and the CIO office brought the entire Senate as much as possible to date into open source technologies. So they develop with open source technologies, they develop with open source IDEs, they still run Windows, but they're making progress. All of their software is built on open source, and NYSenate.gov is Drupal, and so that's how I was able to hook into this. Is Ken Zalewski actually came here and gave a talk on that a couple years ago. So it's not a service. Well, it is a service, but it's an open platform because it provides that RESTful API with very granular access to whatever information you need, and provides feeds. And we don't have the alert thing in there yet, but that's sort of a future thing. So I've been working on it for a year, and we open sourced it for real. Before it was done in a private repo, and they'd periodically push like, oh, we did a version, we'll release that. But now the real-time development is out there and on GitHub, so that's cool. We improved the API a lot, decreased the load times significantly. Did a massive restructuring of the back end, put up some basic documentation because there really wasn't any before, and we wrapped in a build system so that it was not insane to work with and get set up. So for the next year, that's including this semester, the general goals are data quality and documentation, usage tracking and statistics, some user interface improvements, and then further separation of the platform and service, because we really want, the service is very New York State specific, but we'd like the platform to be an open source project that can be reused by other legislative bodies, not necessarily on the state level. But right now it's data quality, data quality, data quality, and then a little bit of documentation, but that's mostly to help with the data quality. And so it's kind of weird, right? Because the Senate is having legislative data quality issues like that. That seems like it's a real problem. But it's not exactly the picture. We actually get the information from a sort of third body that sits in between the Senate and the Assembly called the Legislative Research Service, and they actually have the information in this massive, ancient, like probably written in COBOL mainframe. And for some reason they determined that the only way that they could give us information was if they sent us FTP updates. Well, they didn't send them to us. They'll put updates on an FTP server that we need to retrieve every 5 minutes in this SOBI format, which is they just made up because they thought that it would be a good way to get the information across. But sometimes they mix XML in because I guess it's confusing. So we have to parse it back into XML or JSON or SQL or something sensible before that we can use it. And there's a lot of reasons for difficulty there. The big ones are they very well formatted the SOBI like file format, like this comes after this and that comes after that, but they didn't really document how it behaves, which is important because it's formatted as a changelog sometimes. So we'll get a SOBI file that's only got one line in it that says that there was a vote, and or that like they added a co-sponsor or something, and you need to be able to say, okay, well, we can trace that back to the bill and add it. But other times they'll say, well, there was a new action, so here's all the actions that have ever happened. And so it's hard to tell how it behaves even if it's consistent in getting it out. So, and they're not very cooperative with changing that. So anyway, solutions, and these are really experimental. We couldn't figure out a really established great way of doing this, but we thought that When we parse them, we do it sequentially, and at every single step, we'd write to a, just a JSON file for each object, and then we put that under version control. And then each commit would point back to the SOB file that was responsible for those changes that we logged. And so that way, when we find errors in the files, we can use git to go back and find which commit those popped in, and then see which SOB file it came in, and then see if we can revise our code and how it interprets the behavior. Because it's really unnecessary. And then do unit tests for known corner cases that we come across to make sure we don't break them in the future. And, we were also considering maybe scraping. They've got a website that's post-based, so instead of having a URL for each thing, you can send a slew of information in the post variables and then get an output. So it's not linkable and really usable in that sense, but you can still scrape it. So we were thinking also doing periodic partial scrape checks just to check things out. So progress, we overhauled parsing, we're writing the objects to file, we fixed bugs, and the Senate people have approved us for scraping the LRS, because there's concern that they might be angry that we're just scraping their site. And then, so to do, we need to integrate Git into it and try and further document the behavior that we expect it to have, write test suites, and try to avoid having to scrape at all costs. And so the last thing is that OpenLegislation, and apparently Marthy and Dave and Brian Wachowski